Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're a fan of true crime stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, then you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's gripping tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking twists and revelations coming your way. So stay tuned and let's get into it. Imagine a killer, someone who evaded justice for over 4 decades. A man whose chilling crimes terrified an entire state. He left behind no trace, no witnesses, and no answers. But what if the key to unraveling this mystery wasn't in the hands of detectives, but in the hands of technology? What if a cold case, once thought unsolvable, could be cracked wide open with nothing more than a DNA sample? In 2018, one of the most notorious unsolved crime sprees in American history came to a shocking conclusion. The Golden State Killer, a name that haunted California for years, was finally unmasked. But the story of how they caught him, this is where the real mystery begins. It all started back in the 1970s. The Golden State Killer was not just a killer. He was a master of terror, a serial rapist and murderer who operated with chilling precision. Between 1976 and 1986, he committed at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and dozens of burglaries across California. His victims were always left in fear, always in the dark. No one knew his name, but everyone feared him. For years, investigators scoured through leads, DNA evidence, and witness statements, but the killer always seemed to be one step ahead. His identity remained a mystery, and the case went cold, leaving law enforcement and the families of the victims with nothing but unanswered questions. But in 2018, something incredible happened. After 40 years, the Golden State Killer's reign of terror came to an end, not through traditional police work, but through a controversial and groundbreaking method, DNA. And it wasn't the DNA that was found at crime scenes that did the trick. No, it was something else entirely. In 2018, investigators turned to an entirely new tool, forensic genealogy. This cutting-edge method combined traditional DNA analysis with something unexpected, public genealogy databases. But before we dive into how this method led to his capture, let's backtrack a bit. Genetic testing sites like 23andMe and Ancestry.com allow people to submit their DNA to trace their ancestry. Millions of people have uploaded their genetic information, creating a vast online database. But one lesser-known database, GeneMatch, allowed users to upload their DNA for free, creating a public resource that anyone could access. What investigators realized was that they could use this publicly available data to create a family tree, identifying distant relatives of potential suspects. And that's exactly what happened in 2018. But the real question was, could they track down the Golden State Killer using this method? The breakthrough came when a DNA sample from the Golden State Killer's crime scenes was uploaded to GeneMatch. Almost immediately, distant relatives of the suspect were identified. A family tree was formed, narrowing the pool of suspects down to a group of men born between 1940 and 1960 in California. But there was one major obstacle. How could they narrow down the suspect further? They had no idea who this person was or how to track them down. That's when they turned to surveillance. 4 months, investigators watched as a suspect emerged. A man named James DeAngelo, a former police officer with a background that seemed suspiciously familiar. But was he the one they were looking for? Every move they knew they had to be certain. And then they got a break. A piece of evidence, discarded trash, would finally confirm what they had been hoping for. In April of 2018, after months of surveillance, investigators collected discarded DNA from DeAngelo's trash. The results were shocking. The DNA from the crime scene matched that of James DeAngelo. The Golden State Killer had been caught. But this wasn't the end of the story. The courtroom drama that followed, the legal battle, and the emotional toll on the victims' families all played out in front of the world. How did DeAngelo respond to the charges? What did the families of his victims have to say? But this was only the beginning. Now, the story moves into the courtroom where the survivors, the victims' families, and the world would finally face the monster who had evaded justice for so long. It was April 2018 when the unthinkable happened. James DeAngelo, the man whose DNA had matched the killer's, was arrested. The arrest, while expected, still felt surreal. This was the moment that so many victims, their families, and investigators had been waiting for, yet it still seemed impossible. DeAngelo, once a respected police officer, was now the face of a monster who had caused unimaginable pain. His arrest wasn't just the closure of a case, it was the beginning of a painful and emotional journey for the victims' families. They had lived with fear for decades, wondering if they would ever find justice for their loved ones. For some, the weight of the arrest was overwhelming. It's surreal, said one victim's sister, wiping away tears. "To think that the person who ruined our lives is right here in front of us." For others, the feelings were more complicated, a mix of relief, anger, and disbelief. The days leading up to DeAngelo's trial were filled with anticipation. The world was watching, waiting to see how the man who had terrorized California would face justice. Would he show remorse? Would he fight the charges? Or would he simply remain silent as he had for so long? When DeAngelo finally entered the courtroom for his arraignment, he didn't speak. He didn't show any emotion. He sat there, a ghost of the man who had once been a member of law enforcement. The man who once swore an oath to serve and protect was now the accused. His silence was deafening. But for the victims' families, the silence spoke volumes. They were not silent. They spoke out in ways they never could before. Each one had a story to tell, stories of terror, of heartbreak, of lives ruined by the Golden State Killer's reign of terror. And they had waited 40 years to be heard. One victim's daughter stood up, her voice trembling but strong. "I was just a child when he took my mother from me," she said, fighting back tears. "Every day I've had to live with the fear of the unknown. But now I can finally know that the man who stole her life is here in front of us where he belongs." The trial had only just begun, and already it was clear that the emotional toll on the victims' families was immeasurable. Yet the courtroom was only one stage in this saga. What followed would shake the very foundation of how justice was served, and how the use of DNA in criminal cases could forever change the future of law enforcement. DeAngelo's defense team, however, had a strategy of their own. They weren't denying that he was the Golden State Killer, but their argument would center around one thing: DeAngelo's mental state. Was he competent to stand trial? Was he capable of understanding the charges against him? And so, the case took another unexpected turn. As the defense dug into DeAngelo's past, they painted a picture of a man with a troubled history. They pointed to his time as a police officer, his struggles with mental health, and even alleged trauma from his childhood. Could this man who had done such horrific things truly be responsible for his actions? Could the justice system really hold him accountable? To answer this question, forensic psychologists were brought in to evaluate DeAngelo's mental health. Their testimony would determine if he was fit to stand trial, but also, more disturbingly, whether his actions could be attributed to psychological trauma rather than pure malice. The courtroom became a battleground for experts, each trying to answer the question: is he a monster or is he a broken man? As the defense team continued to argue, the victims' families returned to the stand, and their voices were more powerful than ever. They demanded justice not just for themselves, but for the countless others who had been affected by DeAngelo's horrific crimes. Their testimonies were not just about seeking justice for the victims, but about making sure that DeAngelo's actions were understood for what they truly were. One woman, whose daughter had been murdered by DeAngelo, spoke with such raw emotion that it was impossible not to feel the weight of her words. "He didn't just take a life. He took my future, my happiness, and my peace. But now I have a chance to get some of that back. I hope that justice will finally come for all of us." And then something happened. Something that shocked the courtroom, the victims, and the world. DeAngelo, who had remained silent for so long, finally spoke. But what he said would leave everyone in shock. In a surprising twist, DeAngelo's words weren't what anyone expected. He didn't plead guilty. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Instead, his statement would send ripples through the courtroom, shaking the foundation of the case itself. What did he say? And how would his words affect the fate of the survivors and the families of the victims? We finally uncovered the shocking truth behind what DeAngelo said, and how it all led to the day justice was finally served. It was a moment no one saw coming. After months of silence, Joseph James DeAngelo took the stand, his voice trembling but resolute. The courtroom, already thick with tension, held its breath. What could this man possibly say after all the pain he had caused? "I did it," DeAngelo finally confessed, his words coming out in a cold, emotionless tone. "I'm guilty of the murders, the rapes, everything." The confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom. For victims and their families, it was a moment of validation, a painful acknowledgement that the man who had destroyed their lives had finally admitted to his crimes. But there was something more chilling about it. DeAngelo's lack of emotion, his detached demeanor, it was as if the horrors he had inflicted over decades were merely facts to him, nothing more. For the survivors and families of his victims, this moment was bittersweet. Yes, they had waited decades for the truth, but now that it was out in the open, it didn't erase the pain. It didn't bring their loved ones back. It didn't heal the scars that had been left behind. One victim's sister, who had lived with the fear and anger for so many years, stood up and said, "You have taken everything from us. You took my sister and you took our peace. But today you will pay. And I will stand here, looking you in the eyes, knowing that the justice we've been denied for so long is finally within our reach." DeAngelo's confession was only the beginning. Now it was time for the court to decide his fate. The question was no longer whether he was guilty. Everyone knew that. The question was, how should he be punished for the unspeakable pain he caused so many innocent people? As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on the families was undeniable. Each day they relived the horrors that had shaped their lives. But they also had hope, the hope that DeAngelo would face the full consequences of his actions. The defense team's arguments were weak, attempting to paint DeAngelo as a broken man, a victim of his own mental health struggles. But the victims' families weren't buying it. Their pain wasn't something that could be justified by excuses. DeAngelo's actions were cold, calculated, and driven by evil, and they wouldn't let him escape responsibility. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The jury had deliberated and the verdict was in. As the judge stood to announce the sentence, the courtroom was filled with the sound of breath being held. Was justice truly about to be served? Would this trial bring the closure that so many had waited for? "Joseph James DeAngelo," the judge began, "you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." For the families, the moment was overwhelming. They had fought for justice for so long and now it was here. DeAngelo would never hurt anyone again. His reign of terror had finally come to an end. But for them, the road to healing was just beginning. The damage he caused could never be erased. The scars would always remain. In the days that followed the trial, survivors and their families shared their thoughts. Some said it wasn't enough, they would never be the same. Others found peace, knowing that the man who had stolen so many lives was now behind bars. The one thing they all shared was this, the feeling that justice had finally been served. Joseph James DeAngelo may never fully understand the weight of the suffering he caused. But for those who survived, for the families who lost everything, justice was a long time coming. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the reclaiming of their lives, their dignity, and their peace. After 40 years, the Golden State Killer was finally behind bars. And for the first time in a long time, they could. Thank you for joining us through this emotional journey of justice, closure, and resilience. If you've been following this case, you know that it's not just about solving a crime. It's about the people whose lives were changed forever by the actions of one man. If you found this story powerful and important, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that matter. Together, we can keep shining a light on the truth. Thank you for watching. And remember, justice never forgets. See you in the next video. Like, share, and subscribe.